In this panel, we would like to open the topic of value-based conflicts in society. By value-based conflicts in society, we mean the conflicts where the significant part of population is promoting or requesting public policies based on values which are not acceptable for other part of the population. These different values are presented as incompatible with each other. And by these conflicts, we mean, for example, traditional families versus same-sex families, as one of the examples which we will be discussing during all these days. And these panelists will be developing on this idea and bringing examples from different parts of the globe of conflicts and the approaches which civil society actors are taking to this conflict. And now we should have proper introduction of the panelists. So I would like to ask His Excellency Ambassador of Ukrainian Republic, Yuri Mushka, to introduce Mustafa Dzhemilev, please.
Thank you very much indeed. First of all, I'd like to thanks for the organizers of today's conference, which is very urgent as for today's conflicts which are going on the world. Unfortunately, we do have conflict in Ukraine, and you know it rather well. I believe today, by exchanging views, you can find answers for the 1 billion questions to be answered. And speaking about conflict in Ukraine, of course, number one conflict is aggression in Crimea. I mean, the illegal occupation by Russia of territory which belongs for centuries to the Crimean Tatars. And most prominent representative of Crimean Tatars are today with us, Mr. Mustafa Dzhemilev, who is an MP of Ukrainian Parliament and one of the leaders, the prominent leader of Crimean Tatars, of people who are deprived within 70 years twice, first by Stalin, now by Russians. I don't believe that there is one nation in the world who suffers so much as Crimean Tatars today in Ukraine. So we are not going to compare the Stalinist regime with the Putin's regime, but they are very, very close to each other by their methods, by their aim, and I believe that today's conference and our aim is to put the end to that conflict, to put the end to the depriving of nations all over the world, including the Crimean Tatar. Thank you very much for the invitation, and have a nice day, and have a good working day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. And I will introduce our ladies. I would like to start with Sajeda Shawa. She is from Jordan, and she is a senior humanitarian affairs officer at the Office of the Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for Syria crisis. Very long. She works for United Nations in Syria, taking care of and coordinating some work with Syria refugees. So it's one of the very current issues which we are discussing also in Slovakia, but in the whole region, how to solve the problem of migrants in the countries from which they are coming. She will be specifically talking about this issue. And my dear colleague, Julia Roig from United States, she is the president of PartnersGlobal in Washington, D.C. By profession, she is a lawyer, but for years she is dealing with conflict transformation in very different parts of the world. She lived for a very long time in Colombia, and there is a quite, well, not so known in our region, but very important peace process in Colombia. She knows a lot about it, and she will bring examples from very different parts of the globe about possible approaches. So this is our panel, and I would like to start to giving the floor to Mr. Mustafa Dzhemilev to start with his short presentation about Crimean Tatars and what is going on in Crimea and in Ukraine. Please. I should have said one more thing, sorry. Bara Stefanova is our translator, and she will be consecutively translating from Russia to English, from Russian to English. And for those of us who were born in socialistic times, we can a little bit practice our Russian, although we already had discussion with Mr. Dzhemilev that we try to forget, but there are some occasions when it is useful. Please.
Через микрофон. Вот это. Многоуважаемые дамы и господа, я сердечно приветствую вас на этой конференции на тему «Конфликт интересов и насилия», организованная словацкой неправительственной организацией Partners for Democratic Changes. В программе, разосланной нам и мне, говорится, что я должен выступить с коротким докладом о принципах национального движения крымских татар. Я с удовольствием принял это приглашение и приехал сюда, потому что для нас, особенно после тех драматических событий, которые произошли 3 года тому назад, российской агрессии против Украины, оккупации Крыма и установления в Крыму жесткого тоталитарного режима, знание о тех проблемах, которые сейчас существуют в Крыму, для нас очень важно. Тем более, что мощная пропаганда страны-агрессора сеет по всему миру о всех событиях, которые происходят, и о положении в оккупированном Крыму, абсолютную ложь. Но сперва я хотел бы сказать в нескольких словах о том, кто вообще такие крымские татары. Среди крымских татар в течение уже многих десятилетий ведется такая оживленная полемика относительно самого названия народа крымские татары, потому что многие считают, что применение термина «татары» к коренному народу Крыма не совсем правильно и корректно, потому что этот народ формировался из слияния многих народов, которые жили на территории Крыма в течение тысячелетий и столетий. Разумеется, Золотая Орда, которая оккупировала Крым в начале 13 столетия, тоже имела свое влияние в формировании этого народа, но это влияние было незначительное. Хотя именно они создали то государство крымских татар, Крымское ханство. Поэтому многие коренные жители Крыма, крымские татары, считают, что они должны просто называться по названию своего, по географическому названию, как в Словакии словаки, во Франции французы, а в Крыму крымы. Но другая половина коренного народа считает, что все-таки надо сохранить термин крымские татары, потому что именно под этим названием в течение многих столетий знают о нас как о народе Крыма. Государство крымских татар просуществовало ровно 358 лет, с 1425 по 1783 год, когда Крым был оккупирован российскими войсками и ликвидировано Крымское ханство. Именно с этого момента, с 1783 года, практически началось, собственно, уничтожение нашего народа. Видные государственные деятели, руководители народа были убиты почти первые же дни после оккупации, а некоторым коллаборантам дали дворянские звания, а основное население, гражданское население под натиском оккупантов в условиях репрессий было вынуждено массово покидать свою территорию, преимущественно соседнюю Османскую империю. И хотя во времена Крымского ханства коренное население, крымские татары, составляли где-то 95% населения полуострова, то к моменту большевистской революции в 1917 году они уже на своей родине стали национальным меньшинством, составляли всего 25% населения полуострова. Остальную часть были переселенцы из глубинных районов Российской Федерации, то есть русское население. Тем не менее, в 1921 году по инициативе Ленина, скорее всего, для привлечения симпатии народов мусульманского тюркского Востока, в Крыму была образована Крымская автономная Советская Социалистическая Республика, где одним из государственных официальных языков, наряду с русским, был и крымско-татарский язык. Можно сказать, с этого времени началось какой-то ренессанс, возрождение крымско-татарского языка и культуры, но это продолжалось очень недолго. Уже в конце 20-х годов и вплоть до начала Второй мировой войны прошла массовая волна репрессий преимущественно против национальной интеллигенции крымско-татарского народа. По нашим исследованиям, за этот период в общей сложности было расстреляно или отправлено в лагеря смерти где-то около 10 тысяч человек. И еще около 50 тысяч человек были депортированы в период так называемой коллективизации. Вообще, принимая во внимание те масштабы тех репрессий, которые были во всей стране, и жертвы, когда исчислялись миллионами, может быть, цифры эти 10 тысяч, 50 тысяч не кажутся уж такими уж внушающими. Но для народа, который исчислялся всего лишь, численность была всего несколько тысяч, это была, конечно, страшная трагедия. А в мае 1944 года, то есть ровно за год до окончания Второй мировой войны, крымско-татарский народ был депортирован тотально, до единого человека, вывезен за пределы Крыма, преимущественно в северные районы страны и в Среднюю Азию. По нашим исследованиям, по различным исследованиям, в период депортации и в первые 2 года после депортации крымские татары потеряли от 38 до 46% численности своего народа. Через несколько месяцев после депортации крымских татар были также депортированы этнические армяне, болгары и греки. А этнические немцы были еще депортированы на первые же дни начала Второй мировой войны, около 50 тысяч человек. Одновременно в Крыму уничтожалось все, что напоминало о крымских татарах, сжигались книги, взрывались мечети, ликвидировались кладбища. Практичные большевики использовали надгробные камни как строительный материал для строительства тротуаров, свинарников, одним словом, как строительный материал. То есть задача большевиков была не только произвести этническую чистку на определенной территории, но также уничтожить крымских татар как целостный самобытный народ. Поэтому с полным на то основанием Верховная Рада Украины в прошлом году, в марте, признала это преступление советского режима как преступление геноцид. О начале национального движения крымских татар за возвращение на свою историческую родину и восстановление своих элементарных прав в народе тоже существует несколько различных мнений. Некоторые считают, что отсчет надо вести прямо с 18 мая 1944 года, то есть со дня депортации, потому что очень много людей писали письма товарищу Сталину с протестами против этой депортации. Ну, во-первых, этих писем было не так уж много, и их авторы быстро исчезали. Поэтому, наверное, можно считать более правильным отсчет начала национального движения уже с момента смерти Сталина и наступления хрущевской оттепели. Или, как говорили в диссидентских кругах, начало вегетарианского периода коммунистической партии. Начало того периода, когда за высказывание в защиту своих прав не сразу расстреливали, а всего лишь сажали в тюрьмы. В крымско-татарском национальном движении, как и обычно во всех демократических движениях, конечно, существовали разные течения и направления. Но если говорить о главном направлении, которое практически поддерживалось всем народом, то можно сказать, что она руководствовалась 3 основными принципами. Первый принцип – это неприменение насилия. Но неприменение насилия, как вы знаете, подразделяется на 2 основные категории. Это неприменение насилия как религиозно-философское течение, она отражено, скажем, в Нагорной проповеди Иисуса Христа, в учениях Буддаямы, некоторых индуистских течений, как Сантьягарха или Ахимса, в учениях Льва Толстого и некоторых других. А второй принцип неприменения насилия – это как политическая стратегия для достижения определенных политических целей. Это применялось Махатмой Ганди для достижения независимости Индии, Мартином Лютером Кингом для защиты гражданских прав черного населения Соединенных Штатов. Принцип ненасилия крымско-татарского национального движения скорее можно отнести вот к этой второй категории, как политической стратегии. Но в то же время у национального движения крымских татар была такая философия, что если добиваться каких-то целей с применением насилия, то обязательно при этом страдают ни в чем не повинные люди тоже. А убийство ни в чем не повинных людей, даже для достижения каких-то высоких целей, является большим грехом в соответствии с учением ислама. Поэтому какие бы ни были блестящие достижения, достигнутые с помощью применения насилия, она в конечном счете не принесет блага для народа, если в ходе достижения этой цели была пролита или кровь и слезы невинных людей. Второй принцип – это участники национального движения должны руководствоваться в своих действиях законами страны, где они проживают, и также международными нормами в области прав человека. Это в первую очередь касалось статей 19 и 20 Всеобщей декларации прав человека, где говорилось о праве людей получать и распространять информацию, проводить митинги, мирные митинги и собрания, пикеты, демонстрации в защиту своих прав. И если, скажем, было противоречие между внутренним законодательством и международным правом, и в частности Всеобщей декларацией прав человека, предпочтение отдавалось все-таки международному праву. Дело в том, что вот эти вот права на получение распространения информации, митинги и демонстрации были в Конституции Советского Союза тоже, но с оговоркой, что это разрешается для укрепления социалистического строя. Поэтому наши информационные бюллетени, наши митинги, собрания советской властью, конечно, рассматривались как антисоциалистические и подвергались большому прессингу и репрессиям. Третий принцип – это принцип солидарности. Мы исходили из того, что невозможно говорить о своих правах и в то же время оставаться молчаливым, когда нарушаются права других людей. Поэтому в приговорах, обвинительных заключениях многих крымско-татарских политзаключенных можно было встретить слова, что они выступали в защиту прав протестами против арестов людей других национальностей, против оккупации Чехословакии в 1968 году, против оккупации Афганистана в 1979 году, против злоупотреблений психиатрии, политической цели и многое другое. Вот эта вот демократичность, вот эти принципы национального движения привлекли симпатию очень многих людей к национальному движению крымских татар. И в нашем национальном движении участвовали люди очень многих национальностей. Среди них можно назвать академика Андрея Сахарова, украинского генерала Петра Григоренко, еврея там, Ильи Габая, армянина Генриха Алтуняна. То есть многих людей разных национальностей. И одновременно участие людей разных национальностей в крымско-татарском национальном движении способствовало тому, что у крымских татар не было крайнего национализма, неприязненных отношений к другим народам. Борьба крымских татар была долгой, упорной, но в конечном счете успешной. Конечно, много людей, которые боролись за возвращение на свою родину, так и не увидели своей родины, похоронены на чужбине. Много людей, которые боролись и были в тюрьмах, так и не вышли из тюрьмы, погибли там, но в конечном счете мы вернулись на свою родину. Поэтому мы с гордостью говорим, что боролись против самого жестокого тоталитарного режима, добились успеха, вернулись на свою родину и гордимся тем, что за все годы, десятилетия нашей борьбы мы не пролили ни капли чужой крови. Но 3 года назад случилась новая трагедия, новая катастрофа. Наша земля оккупирована уже 2-й раз Российской Федерацией. И на нашей земле установлен режим полубандитский, тоталитарный режим, который очень похож на советский режим. Народ, который столько лет боролся за демократию и свободу, снова оказался в условиях более, даже хуже, чем советский режим тоталитарного режима. Народ, который так много боролся, чтобы вернуться на свою историческую родину, сейчас в условиях оккупации под прессингом вновь вынужден покидать свою землю, преимущественно материковую часть Украины. Поэтому нам предстоит еще очень более упорная борьба уже против оккупации, против оккупантов. И я уверен, абсолютно уверен в том, что мы обязательно изгоним из своей территории оккупантов. И я очень надеюсь, что освобождение все-таки Крыма будет без кровопролития. Но для этого нужна мощная солидарность всех демократических сил во всем мире. И последнее, что я хочу сказать, а то мне там показывается, что мне времени не осталось. Я здесь хотел бы выразить свою сердечную признательность Словакии, ее руководству, депутатам, словацким депутатам в Европарламенте, Парламентской ассамблее Совета Европы, Парламентской ассамблее ОБСЕ, которые неизменно и всегда решительно поддерживают Украину в ее борьбе против агрессии российской, решительно выступает за деоккупацию Крыма и оказывает практическую помощь нашей стране в эти тяжелые для нас часы. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dzhemilev. I think the message from the person who most of the time is not able to live in own land, who spent very long time in jail, and still keeping the principles on non-violence, obeying the law, and solidarity, I think we have to listen very carefully, because still we are in very easy position comparing what you just described to us. And I would, you mentioned many occasions when you were solidar with other countries, and I would like to point out to us that, especially Czech and Slovaks who are in this room, that in '68, when the Russian troops, together with Warsaw Pact, came to Czechoslovakia, Mr. Dzhemilev, together with 7 other people, 8 together, so very visible, was protesting against the occupation. I think it takes a very strong personality and courage to do so. And we have to learn a lot from you. So thank you very much. Okay. Now we are going to look on another very difficult situation. And Sajeda Shawa will tell us a little bit about the situation in Syria and in her country, Jordan, and the context in which she's doing her work. Please, Sajeda.
Yeah, well, it's very difficult to take the floor after Mr. Dzhemilev, who's not only a legend for people in this part of the world, but he is a legend for my generation in my country and in the region around, which is the Middle East, and which would seem too far away from here and completely different. But in the essence, all conflicts and all violent acts is about human beings. They are caused by human beings, and those that pay the prices of these conflicts are human beings. So from here, please allow me to do a little bit of introduction of where I come from and why am I here with you today. As I was rightly introduced, I am a humanitarian aid worker, and I work with the UN, in a particular part of the UN in charge of the coordination of humanitarian affairs, in particular for the Syria crisis across the region, meaning inside Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Turkey, where the Syria crisis is happening, or in neighboring countries where people fleeing Syria are being hosted as refugees. If I would go back to why did I join this kind of work, I would say that I come from a country that for decades and decades was part or found itself located in the middle of conflicts. The population of Jordan today stands at 12 million people. 9 of them are Jordanians. 3 million are Syrian guests, refugees living in Jordan. And out of the original 9 million people, are 70% Palestinian refugees that resided in Jordan for more than 3 generations. So technically speaking, Jordan exists on 1/3 or less than 1/3 of the total population of Jordan, essentially. However, it has been a safe zone for conflicts happening in the region for the last decade, whether it's the Palestinians fleeing the occupied Palestinian territories due to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or Iraqis and Jordanians that were living in Iraq as part of the Gulf War that happened between Kuwait and Iraq, or the Libya crisis, or the Yemeni crisis, and the most recently, the Syria crisis. So it's a hub. It happens to be geographically located in the middle of all these scary conflicts where people would be pushed to flee their countries, and they would look for a safe zone to live in, or a safe haven. I don't want to use the term safe zone for its bad implications. But it's the only small country with its very limited resources that hosts that much of refugees. Or not refugees, but people seeking safety. And to go back one step further of how did I join? I was just a typical Jordanian girl that studied English language and literature because the cultural norms dictate that everybody needs to be either a doctor or an engineer or, you know, something that would grant me a job afterwards in the standards of my culture and my parents. But for one reason or another, my English language bachelor degree helped me to find a job in the European Commission in the humanitarian angle. And one day I was called from my holiday to be sent on search to serve in the Libya crisis. And I was faced by too many incidents and cases of families, women with children, single mothers, people that had to flee Libya with the only piece of clothes that they had on, with absolutely nothing, with babies going around crying because they don't have one portion of milk to drink. And it just hit me that this could be me. It could be my family. These crying babies could be my kids. So what can I do about it? So I went back home after spending like a year in that job, and I did a second master's degree specialized in humanitarian diplomacy. And my focus was basically on understanding the humanitarian landscape in the Middle East, especially after the Arab Spring, which is very similar to many conflicts happening in this part of the world, that changed the value of people, that changed their characters and their perspectives and their rights into life, that they shouldn't accept dictatorship anymore. They have equal rights to ask for and just to protest, which was never the norm in the Middle East. So with doing that degree, I started looking around. What are the existing support systems? What are the civil societies existent in our country? Who's doing the humanitarian work? And again, I find out that everybody that joined NGOs or civil societies or UN agencies had different backgrounds. None of them specialized in the humanitarian field or humanitarian diplomacy for a very simple reason. Again, it was not part of our cultural norms. It was not part of our educational system by any means. But dictated by circumstances that we're becoming one of the biggest host countries across, not the region, but globally in comparison to the number of population in Jordan, now you see that there is an increase of around 40% of the number of fresh graduates in universities specializing in humanitarian affairs. You see universities enrolling more and more specializations in social development, in humanitarian, in strategic planning, because it is not a luxury anymore. It is a core science needed to create jobs for Jordanians, and not only to create jobs, but to be in a position of responding to any crisis happening in the region where we will receive more refugees or people seeking refuge in our country, or if God forbids that happens to us, that we will be in a position of responding to our needs. So if I move from my personal story and the situation of the education and the increasing interest in humanitarian affairs and the need for that in our life, into global figures about refugees, other things that I do for a living, In terms of numbers, sorry, I don't have the clicker. Sorry, can you pass it on, please? So I'm sorry already that my presentation would include so many figures, but I'll try to skip quickly, and I'm happy to share it later on. Globally, the number of refugees that stand today is 65.3 million. And I don't think that I will need to go through the definitions of displacement, refugees, and statelessness, and I'm happy to share that on one-to-one basis afterwards. But in general today, 65.3 million are forced to leave their countries. 21.3 million are refugees. 10 million are stateless. And if we want to dig more to see where do they come from, unfortunately, the majority come from Syria today. And I'm delighted to have 3 Syrian friends joining among the crowd today. But unfortunately, whether we like it or not, the largest number of those refugees come from Syria. Then Afghanistan, Somalia, and South Sudan. They might not reflect all the figures, all the numbers, all the expectations that we have in mind, but these are the latest statistics based on registered refugees with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees and coordinated by the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Who hosts them? According to figures of registered refugees, and that is not necessarily the complete number of refugees that are already outside of their countries, Turkey is the biggest host country, then Pakistan comes, and then Lebanon. I was in Lebanon 2 weeks ago, and the situation now is that the number of Syrians outnumber the number of Lebanese in that country, in a way that Lebanese do not have the security of having job opportunities anymore. Not because of anything, but because Syria and Lebanon has been always neighboring countries, and the relationship is more of a family relationship. So people are given the opportunity to work. And in Jordan, as I mentioned earlier, my hometown, with the small capacities, limited capacities, no natural resources whatsoever, depending only on Jordanians as the only source of income for Jordan, we were classified last month as the biggest host country for Syrian refugees worldwide in comparison to the original number of population in Jordan. In terms of asylum seekers, the biggest European country that hosts asylum seekers is Germany. We can go through figures, but unfortunately, again, the biggest number of these asylum seekers come from Syria as well. If we dig more and more into the needs or the situation of the Syria crisis, I don't know to what extent how many among the crowd is following the news on Syria, that last week we entered the 7th year of the conflict. 6 continuous years of the conflict happening in one country, with all these refugees getting outside the country, the situation getting intense and worse by the day. And the bill is basically 13.5 million people in need. Out of them, 5.7 are in acute need for humanitarian need. 1 out of 3 people in Syria today is insecure. They don't have enough food to eat. And when I say that they are food insecure, it doesn't mean that they don't have biscuits or they don't have the luxury items. No, they don't have bread, they don't have water. Over half of the people were forced to leave. 15.5 people are living in poverty. 4.8 million refugees are in neighboring countries, and almost 5 people are living in hard-to-reach areas where no UN agency or international NGO would have the access to them. What do these figures translate into? Or they translate into different things. And I don't want to go into the details of all of this, but just for you to know, what do these big figures mean? They mean that 85% of the areas are exposed to early marriages because people would need to change their values and they need adoption mechanism. They might need to push their girls for early marriages or sell them like slaves because they need the money in return. Or it could become a protection mechanism because they are concerned about the protection of their little girls, that they might be kidnapped, they might be harassed, anything can happen to them. So the safe protection mechanism is to go for early marriages. 1/3 of the Syrian generation children are out of school. And for those who know Syria, it was one of the most educated countries with the best educational systems in the Middle East, and the first universities were ever built in Syria. Today, we are faced by 1/3 of the generation knows nothing but conflict and has never been enrolled into a school. And there is a term describing this generation as the lost generation. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed. 25% of the household pay their income only to get their water requirements. 7 million people are food insecure. 30,000 people suffer war-related injuries. 60% of the population require WASH assistance. 4.3 people are in danger. And the last scary category is child recruitment. In a similar manner to the early marriage, child recruitment rates are increasing more and more. The rates of children being recruited by different extremist groups is happening because they don't have a choice, and it would be a life or death decision for them to either join or not, or because that is the only way for them to secure food to their families, so they would join the military forces. For you to have an idea about the political influences, I will not go into that, but there are government-held areas, ISIL-affiliated groups, non-state armed actors and Kurdish forces taking different parts of Syria. So you can imagine I wouldn't say, I'm not sure what is the word, but you can imagine the scary influence, conflicting influence of each one of these groups and their own hidden agendas affecting the mindset of the coming generation and the people who are sitting there. That in many cases, one family can have 5 members and each one of them would belong to a different party, and they would become enemies sitting in the same living room or sitting in the same house. What does this mean more and more? I'm sorry that I'm sharing so many painful realities, but I'm here as an advocate to share with you what is happening there. The translation of all of this is that everybody, and when I say everybody, I mean every woman, every child, every female, everybody in Syria is in danger of child labor, child recruitment, domestic violence, exploitation, explosive hazards, family separation, forced early marriages, housing, property issues, lack or loss of personal civil documentations, harassment, intercommunal disputes, kidnapping, sexual violence, and tensions between hosts and IDPs in neighboring countries. Scary to think that one nation is facing all of this for 6 years and starting the 7th year now. Now, the international community started supporting as per the international obligations and law. The United Nations got into the the UN agencies, by their legal obligation, had to interfere. But one remarkable thing that I want to share with you, which was really remarkable in Syria as the first time that happens ever in the history of any humanitarian crisis managed by the UN, is the role of the Syrian NGOs. As you saw, the political influences in the country itself would restrict the movement of international NGOs and UN agencies. And the only way for us to deliver aid inside Syria was via national NGOs. And the role that the Syrian NGOs is playing is like the beating heart of the operation. One Syrian NGO managed to create some sort of a platform that includes 300 NGOs, and they managed to do the advocacy work in a way that they were granted seats on the highest level of strategic decision-making platforms inside the UN. They were sitting on, if anybody is following yesterday, the Brussels conference for the 6th International Pledging Conference for Syria happened in Brussels yesterday. And one Syrian NGO only was sitting on the panel of the NGOs speaking about the needs. Why? Because they managed to unify their forces to have a joint representation for 300 NGOs and to represent them very well outside. Now, this is called the Humanitarian Response Plan, and it puts together what are the needs, what's the plan to fulfill, what do people need. But they focused more and more on 3 objectives that would maintain the identity, the values, and everything of the next Syrian generation. And it's to provide life-saving humanitarian assistance, enhance the prevention and mitigation of protection risks, and increase the resilience and livelihood opportunities and affected to access of basic services. There are many slides, but I don't want to go through them because I was told I only have a few minutes. I just want to flag two things. One of them is that whatever the UN does all around the world is not engraved in stone. In the case of Syria crisis, we had to think outside the box. We had to be flexible. We had to amend the ways that we work to save the values of people and to save the lives of people. Remember, all these figures are not numbers. These are human beings, just like me and you, all of us. So we had to get out of our ways, and we came up with new strategies that you can find in a beautiful report called Leaving No One Behind, that sets the principles of humanitarian support in such crises. You can find it online, and I'm happy to provide you with a copy of that. But the main lessons learned that we learned from the Syria crisis, where everybody in the civil society is in NGOs and working in social development need to keep in mind, is basically four principles. One of them is to reinforce and don't replace existing capacities and coping strategies. The second one is to enter with an exit, collaborate to reduce an humanitarian need, not to walk there as any emergency agency and think that we would stay there forever. It is not fair for the people, it is not fair for the national organizations, and we will never survive staying there as external influencers. The third point is leverage comparative advantage, strengthen connectivity and strategic leadership, and to see the whole picture, 360 degrees of risks and needs, and to have proper assessment of what needs to be done, not to decide on our own individually that we need to distribute water or tents or blankets. I just want to close with one line, that we're talking about human beings that have values and had lives that changed in one day. We all have responsibility, commitments, and we can do something to help, to maintain those values. We can help those in need. And I'm urging you personally to help those that need help as long as we can help them, as long as we are on this side where we can help, and not, God forbids, we are sitting in a tent waiting for somebody to come and get us a piece of bread. I'll ask my good friend Lucas to play a video that was photo-shooted in Aleppo city 3 weeks ago, repeating the message, where there is a will, there is a way. It is composed by a Syrian famous composer called Zaid Dirani, and it is, the lead singer is a 6-year-old blind girl who gives only hope about life and says that even me with my limited capacities and lack of physical sight still can give hope to others. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Sajeda, thank you very much. In these courses in our countries, it seems that we are taking the burden of the migrants, of refugees. I think this gives totally different perspective to that. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to learn a lot about what these 300 NGOs are doing in Syria, mm-hmm. and take much more public awareness on that, because otherwise we come back again and again to the same saying, okay, the problem should be solved where it started, and we shouldn't be doing anything without real knowledge what is possible and what is our position in that. So thank you very much. I know that we have difficult stories here, but we will continue with one more presentation. And Julia will have very difficult position to be third in this panel. And Julia will be speaking about more global examples and approaches to the conflicts. Julia.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And wow, right after singing Children, it's very hard to go after that. I feel emotional, actually. But also, what resiliency. This was a very powerful message to both these discussions, and I'm very happy to be here on behalf of the Partners Network. You know, PDCS and PartnersGlobal are a part of a network of local organizations working around the world. So now that we've heard from political violence, political repression, war, and the effects of war on human life, those of us who work in the civil society sector in other countries who are maybe dealing with a different level of violence, of community level violence, who are wondering how do we make a difference in the kind of work that we do. Like Lucas was saying in the very beginning, looking at all the pictures of Mosul, we don't want to end up there. We see signs, we see trends, and we want to be collectively addressing this. So what I wanted to do today was to just share a framework of some trends that I see in the global civil society field, and some of the work that our network members are doing more at the very community-based level of working on violence. And then I get a lot of questions now coming from the United States about our own political system and experience. And just to say, this is very real for us in the United States, being now a member of our own civil society who's been very internationally focused. And now we live in a very clearly divided country that is seeing some of our own trends of what that division means. So this is very personal for us in the US as well, even though I'm going to be talking about some international experiences. So the main framework that I wanted to share with you that we see as a trend that has been helpful for us to think about violence is thinking about violence as a public health issue. If we consider the spread of violence like an epidemic, the way that public health officials treat violence, the spread of violence, the containment of violence, it gives a framework of us distinguishing the different interventions, and it also helps us think about how we coordinate our work at different levels. I think there's a lot of different people who have a different piece of this. We know that violence is sticky, they say, so it has a tendency to spread, but it spreads from a very few violent behaviors that then can spark and really, within defined geographic areas, quickly spread. So like public health professionals who may be thinking about a disease like malaria, they're very systematic in saying we need to prevent the spread. Once it has been spread, we need to contain it. And once somebody has caught it, we need to treat it. And so when we take this analogy in our work, when we think about triage, like public health officials who need to do triage, we need to be very focused, and we need to be very targeted, and looking at the risks and the types of violence in order that our interventions are addressing that within the community. The reason that I wanted to focus on this as a framework is I think it helps us depoliticize working on violence. Because I think for whatever reason, if it's a hard security versus a human rights approach, this becomes a very political hot debate. But if we think of violence as a public health issue that deserves our whole of community approach to treat it, it gives us this different way of coordinating with each other outside of that political realm. So very quickly, I'm going to talk about a couple of examples of prevention. We're going to have a whole panel on youth violence prevention. But you know, in my world, in DC and in the international development field, we talk a lot about countering violent extremism. And how do you prevent people from joining extremist groups? And there's a lot of different theories about this. And what we've taken from a US experience and a regional experience in Central America is how people decide to join gangs. We have a big problem, or had a big problem in Los Angeles, for example, of a lot of gang violence. And the city of Los Angeles developed, using this public health approach, looked at very micro-targeting of risk factors of young people who were more likely than not to join a gang or to engage in violent behavior. So that if we think about youth violence prevention, we think, well, let's set up a community center. And you hopefully put the community center in the most violent areas. Maybe you just have this nice community center, and then you hope people come in after school. And this is a very different approach. This is to take a population and to have them go through an assessment of specific risk factors. And this has gone through a lot of different academic studies of, has the young person had some kind of critical life event? Have they been exposed to violence in their past? How much peer influence do they have? Is there weak parental supervision, et cetera, et cetera? You can imagine what they are, because these are a lot of social work issues. These are social workers. But then the kinds of interventions can be targeted to those risk factors. They've had a lot of success of only treating the most likely risky young people who are on that path to take them off the path. And now we've taken this approach, and we're taking it to the Middle East and other parts where you look at why young people are joining extremist movements, and you're overlaying onto those risk factors that were developed in El Salvador and in other places, and putting on top of it a radicalization framework that have a little bit more of the religious considerations of recruiters and where they're going to a mosque and a moment in their life that they're most vulnerable to recruitment, and how to prevent those moments or to be by their side in those moments. The one thing that I want to mention about the prevention is what we've debunked through this very specific micro-targeting is the idea that it's just about jobs and economic employment. A lot of the private sector work and partnerships that we're trying to develop say, well, we just need to give young people jobs, and then they won't turn to violence. We actually know this is not true, because the drivers and the risk factors, it's one thing, but it's really, especially in a place like Tunisia, has more to do with social grievances, with exclusion. And so if we work with companies that want to be supportive of in giving jobs, we say more than jobs, it's mentorship. More than mentorship even, it's having really good family practices in your business so that parents can leave it at a certain time. These are things that we know, I think, through our good social work, but that we need to spend our focus, if we want to do violence prevention, to be very targeted. The last thing that I want to say is, again, what the relationship with community policing. We know one of the life events that really affects the drive towards some kind of violence in a young person's life is to have some kind of bad interaction with the police or military. And so community policing for prevention goes a long way, we've seen. We focus a lot on having good relationships with the police. And then my last name, by the way, Roig, is a Catalan last name. I married a Spaniard. And so I've wanted to mention also a very interesting initiative in Barcelona, which is a different side of prevention, this concept of narratives and how divisive and violent narratives are being propagated in a society. It's both a social media issue, but it's also just our own kind of word of mouth. And there's something called the Anti-Rumors campaign in Barcelona, where they very strategically placed champions for tolerance and inclusion within different parts of the community, so that when somebody says they're taking our jobs, they, the other, this is looking at, they're uncivil, looking at both immigrants and refugees, they said, no, these are just rumors, and they have very specific ways of combating these rumors, and it's a whole of city approach that has also been shown to have a lot of success. With regards to containment, this issue when violence might be happening and you want to make sure it doesn't spread even more, I wanted to share a couple of different examples. One is, you see the Interrupters. There's an organization that started in Chicago by a public health official called Cure Violence. And the concept is if you take a gang group and you find people within this group to kind of get them out and say, you can be a part of stopping the killing. You have these friends, you understand kind of the code of the streets. We'll help train you. We're not going to take you out of the gang. But if and when something's going to go down, you hear that maybe there's some kind of fight that's happening, we'll give you the skills to stop it. And it's been proven, the statistics of the violence interruption, when somebody within the group goes and helps to calm things down, that the violence, the homicides in particular, have gone down. This has been expanded throughout the urban areas of the United States. Now they've been in South Africa, they've been in Honduras, they've been in Iraq, actually, training this concept of violence interruption. There's a whole documentary on the Interrupters that you can look up in Google, and you can see how the work is unfolded in Chicago. I wanted to mention some work that we've been doing in Yemen. Yemen right now, as you know, is in a civil war. It's a big conflict, lots of the same humanitarian crisis that was mentioned. We have an affiliate, Partners Yemen, who's been there since 2008. And while they're also dealing with the humanitarian crisis, one thing that they've been working on for many years is working with women facilitators in each of the communities, because issues not just of political violence in the civil war, but of blood feuds, of tribal conflict, really the customary system of being able to arbitrate conflicts through the traditional tribal system has been declining because of the civil unrest. And what we found is that the network of women who can talk to their uncles, they can talk to their sons and their husbands, when they learn that something's going to happen, try to say, no, let's go meet with the tribal leader and the sheikh, and that they have the ability to kind of interrupt the cycles of violence, very similar to what we're finding in West Africa, in Nigeria, in Guinea, in Mali, where there's this increase of extremism, increase of very difficult community violence, and the women are serving as really a containment. So the last kind of part of the public health concept is then, well, once the violence has happened, what is the treatment? And we as a society have to make a decision about the way we treat different kinds of violence. And we see the importance of restorative justice. Many of us have been working in this area of victim-offender mediation, trying to be conciliatory of the relationships. We know that when a young person goes to prison, that this is often the moment where extremism is hardened. And so a lot of the prison programs of working with those young people so that they don't fall into more cycles of violence afterwards. I put up a picture of Colombia, and Kaya mentioned the Colombia peace process, because it's a very interesting time that they just signed the peace accords. So this concept of reconciliation is particularly important. This was a 50-year civil war, so that we don't talk about forgiveness in Colombia at all, but we do have schools of reconciliation to say, what is the process of trying to find some kind of empathy with the aggressors? And can we as an institutions and civil society find a way of moving on, let's say, of moving forward, and that rehabilitation of those aggressors, we have to see them as human beings as well. This message of there was a human being on the other side who has a story, and there's a lot of rehabilitation of trying to bring those violent offenders back into society. So I have a picture up here of a brain. And part of the reason I wanted to do that is just to signal a trend that we see with our field of wanting to be in deeper relationship with cognitive and behavioral scientists who are studying the brain science around reconciliation. There's some very interesting work being done on rituals, on spiritual practice, not necessarily religion, but the way those rituals help to rewire the brain for that future reconciliation. And we have a lot to learn on physically what's happening in your brain when you've experienced conflict, and physically what can happen in your brain when you go through a process of ritual to get to the other side. And then my final point is I wanted to say, if we think about our role as civil society and as conflict resolvers, part of what I have to do is think about how do we train? How do we design our programs? What are the kinds of policies we're advocating for? There's been a big shift in the conflict resolution field to really understand that conflict and violence isn't episodic. It's not a moment in time that we address, we convene, we have a dialogue, and it's over. But we have to understand the system that we're working in. We have to think about the complexity of these issues. And it's a real shift from looking at conflict mapping and looking at the causal links of what causes conflicts to thinking about these feedback loops and the context mapping. These are totally different skills, actually, from what we were taught in the beginning. I know we know this intrinsically, but then what do we do with that information? And so I think I would just encourage us to be on the cutting edge of systems thinking, of adaptability, like our colleague was saying at the UN. Nothing is fixed. We have to constantly be adapting. So maybe that means dialogue is not always the right answer. Maybe the collaborative approach of bringing people together isn't what's necessary, and we have to kind of press ourselves to have new tools. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much. This is a very complicated issues to kind of be touching on, but I'm happy to just present some thoughts and some examples, and I'm looking forward to the future conversations over the next 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. It would be great if we have a time for your interaction, but because we have only 10, maximum 15 minutes left, I would like to open to our audience. If you have any questions to any of our presenters, you have the possibility to ask or to comment. we will have a chance for maximum 3-4 comments. But if you have some questions or comments, please feel free to show by your hand that you would like to say something, and our colleague Adela Kihlarikova will come to you and give you a microphone. And then, I can see you. Please introduce yourself and either ask question or give us your comment, please.
Hello, my name is Lukáš Houdek. I'm from Hate Free Culture campaign from Czech Republic. I just wanted to address you. I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Jordanian guest.
Sajeda.
I've been to Jordan last year and doing some program with Jordan right now for half year. And I just wanted you, maybe if you could say a little bit, because I think it's somehow it's interesting in regard of the conflict. Because I know that within the humanitarian work in Jordan, there were kind of, let's say, conflicts with the locals that were not very happy about money going to refugees from different countries and having nothing for us as locals. And I know that there were some preventions made in this case, and I think it would be interesting to mention it, so that like always part of the money goes to the local communities. And I think it's it was, in my opinion, it was good way how you can solve the conflicts that can happen.
So it's about the situations in Jordan communities where the refugees or people...
the mitigation of tension between host communities and guests, refugees.
So please, if you would like to respond.
Well, to respond quickly, and we can discuss it further in more details later on. As I told you, the breakdown of population in Jordan was 9 million, and then we had 3 million additional guests. So the problem with the local host communities is that 40% of the population live under the poverty line, below the poverty line. And seeing the flow of humanitarian assistance, as it is the biggest humanitarian crisis for the Syrian guests, just made sense because they really need the support. But with the time, the refugees were allowed and given access to the host communities so they don't stay inside the camps. 70% of Syrian refugees now are living in host communities in the northern part of Jordan. So you would walk into a street and find a house with 1 floor Jordanians, 2nd floor Syrians, and 3rd floor Iraqis. And when the assistance comes, they would target the 2nd floor, but they would miss the 1st floor and the 3rd floor, who are already poor and not living in a better condition. So tensions happened. We started having issues, and they started becoming a trend, not individual incidents. So the government had to intervene and introduce new measures where 20% or 30% of any assistance that would be directed to Syrians in Jordan needs to be directed to support the local communities, whatever comes. And a bit by bit, there was more and more political fundraising from the government to get budgetary support to refresh the infrastructure of Jordan in a way that it enables it to provide more services for the Syrian refugees in Jordan and other refugees in case more crises would happen. So that's in short. Thank you.
Thank you, Sajeda. Any other question or comment? Yes, Anna, at the back.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Anna Shvachka. I represent Ukrainian community in Ukrainian Civic Association Smith Polo. I would like to ask your permission to make a question by Russian for Mustafa Aga. Can be?
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you translate also the question? Okay.
Мустафа Ага, мы очень рады вас здесь видеть. Для нас это очень важно, потому что тема Крыма, которую мы пытаемся поднимать внутри нашей громады, она, конечно, резонирует в том случае, если приезжают такие гости. Спасибо организаторам за приглашение вас на это мероприятие.
I wanted to thank the organizer for inviting Mustafa Dzhemilev and for raising the topic of Crimea, which is most resonant today at this point and also in our community.
Живя в Крыму, я могу заверить всех присутствующих, что крымские татары всегда поражали нас, крымчан, своим единством в достижении целей и в том числе в политических процессах, которые проходили в Крыму. Этому единству можно было завидовать, и нужно отдавать ему должное. Сейчас, в силу тех событий, которые постиг Крым, я бы хотела спросить вас, существует ли точно такое же единство между разными группами людей, которые выехали из Крыма и вместе сейчас борются за его освобождение? И как вы для себя видите достижение этого единства среди украинцев, выехавших из Крыма? Спасибо.
As somebody from Crimea, I can say that we have always been most impressed by the strength and resilience and unity of the Crimean Tatars in their struggle, in their political struggle for freedom. My question is there unity among the groups who left Crimea, and how do you think that freedom and freedom from occupation can be achieved? And is there a unity between the Crimean community in Ukraine and Ukrainians?
You have the microphone.
Когда у народа какая-то экстремальная ситуация, конечно, выявляется сущность людей, что они из себя представляют. И мы вообще-то ожидали, что после оккупации, после такого прессинга у нас будет довольно большое число коллаборантов. Ну, к нашей гордости, к нашему счастью, этих коллаборантов оказалось очень мало. И здесь большое значение имела вот сама позиция людей по отношению к этим коллаборантам. Вот, например, когда они появляются где-то на людях, никто с ними руку не подаст им. Они садятся где-то там на свадьбе или что, другие люди поднимаются и уходят. То есть отношение к ним как к прокаженным. И в результате они чувствуют себя очень некомфортабельно, и она не способствует дальнейшему увеличению числа коллаборантов и числа крымских татар. Но вы правильно сказали, что крымские татары в какой-то мере отличались от большинства, потому что у крымских татар есть опыт борьбы, многолетний опыт борьбы с советским режимом. И вот эти все попытки оккупационных властей разделить наш народ пока не увенчиваются успехом.
Well, you see, in an extreme situations encourage unity. This pressure encourages unity. And after the occupation of Crimea, we expected that there were going to be many collaborators with the new regime, but actually there are not that many. And this is due to the fact that people have an attitude towards them. For example, if you're a collaborator, people are not going to shake your hand. They are going to cross the street and not speak to you. If you arrive somewhere, people are going to leave. So the attitude of people towards collaborators means that it makes it really uncomfortable for anyone to collaborate with the occupiers. But I suppose Crimean Tatars have always been different, because we have had this long experience of struggle against occupation and struggle against the oppression of the Soviet regime, who has always tried to divide us. The occupiers have always tried to divide us. So we have a different approach to unity and staying united.
Ну, народ действительно сейчас находится в очень тяжелом положении, и основное настроение, чувство в оккупированном Крыму – это страх. Страх разговаривать друг с другом. Страх, что завтра к тебе там придут с обыском. Вот у нас, особенно у крымских татар, потому что за время оккупации по настоящий день где-то произошло 500-600 обысков в домах людей. Из них где-то 95% у крымских татар, хотя они составляют всего 13% населения полуострова.
But of course the situation is extremely difficult. The mood in occupied Crimea is, the predominant mood is fear. People are afraid to talk freely to others. There is always fear of arrest and house searches. Since the occupation, there have been 500 to 600 house searches, with 95% of them with Crimean Tatars, even though Crimean Tatars were only 13% of the total population of Crimea.
Я думаю, вот эти вот репрессии будут продолжаться, потому что репрессивный режим, тоталитарный оккупационный режим без этого не может там держаться. Если там было бы демократическое сообщество, они бы там не продержались. Вот они могут держаться только на репрессии. И поэтому мы ожидаем, что будет еще больше репрессий, и призываем всех наших соотечественников не покидать Крым. Потому что основная стратегия оккупантов – вытеснить крымских татар из Крыма, потому что они поняли, что с крымскими татарами они не договорятся.
And I would say that the repressions, they still go on, they will be even worse, because they are a totalitarian occupational force, and being totalitarian, they need repression. This is what they live by, this is what they maintain their power by. And the repressions are going to get worse, I have to say. What we are doing is we are trying to tell people not to leave Crimea, because their strategy is to force Crimean Tatars out. They have seen by experience that they can't make a deal with us, so they are trying to force us out.
Что касается людей, которые уже оказались в материковой части, выехавшие из Крыма, там, конечно, есть люди разных воззрений, разных течений, но мы стараемся всем объяснить главное, что сейчас у нас всех нас объединяет общий враг – Путин, агрессия России. Давайте все наши усилия направлять в этом направлении. А все остальные наши там противоречия, разногласия – это потом, после деоккупации, после освобождения, так сказать, разберемся.
And as for the Crimean Tatars living, who have already left Crimea and who are living in mainland Ukraine, our policy is that there are all these different opinions, but we have one common goal, the liberation, and we have one common enemy, Putin and the aggression. So what we're trying to say is now let's put all of our effort into liberation, and after we are liberated from occupation, then we can talk about all our differences.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have two more questions, so this will be all for this discussion. Braňo Tichý, please.
Sorry. Good morning, everybody. My name is Braňo Tichý. I'm from People in Need Slovakia, a humanitarian NGO based here in Bratislava. First of all, let me say thank you very much for absolutely inspiring talk, Mr. Dzhemilev. It's a huge privilege to hear a personal story and the story of the Tatars. But my question is to the both of the ladies. Actually, as a part of our work, we currently work in northern Iraq, in Ninive, in Dohuk. And what we experience is the tension that already has been talked about between the host communities and the internally displaced people. You can look at the violence from a different perspective, or tackling the violence from the bottom up as community violence approaches that Julia talked about, and also from a top down, from a global or political perspective. So my question for Julia is, can you give us an example of how these community initiatives eventually led to a global solving of the situation, some kind of upscale from the community to bigger scale? And the question for Sajeda is, are you happy or satisfied with how UN is dealing with the top down from the political perspective, looking for a solution in Syria or in Iraq based on the political landscape, which is very difficult. Thank you.
Thank you. Julia, do
You want me to go
okay.
first? Yeah, so a couple of examples that I might say, kind of one successful maybe and one maybe not so successful. I do think Colombia is an example of a peace process that ultimately came from very grassroots efforts. And so there were so many communities that were trying to reconcile locally that were a safe conflict-free zone that we're saying the political violence isn't going to come here, a lot of trying to incorporate political actors. And there was enough partnership somehow with the private sector, trying to, so different associations of the business community were coming together in local levels. So the Coffee Growers Association of Colombia that then eventually were putting political pressure. And I think that this has resulted in, after 55 years of the government finally really listening and saying it's time to resolve this conflict. The not so, I'm thinking obviously about Latin America right now, but the not so successful backsliding might be El Salvador, that had its own peace accords 20 years ago. And it's a very small country. I mean, it's smaller than Slovakia, much smaller. And there was so much grassroots movements leading to their own peace accords, and now the political and regional politics, a lot of organized crime, different kind of big geopolitical issues are making everything just to be chaos. And El Salvador is one of the most violent places in the world now.
Thank you, Sajeda. Would you like to react?
Well, 2 points to start with. First of all, I'm here as a humanitarian aid worker, and I come from the humanitarian side of the UN. There are political masters who are leading the political peace process and talks, Mr. De Mastura and Jan Egeland at the moment. So our job is to give them the good arguments why they need to push for a stronger position in the peace talks and not to disappoint the human beings that trust us, that, concretize our accountability. So my personal opinion does not really matter at this point, whether I'm happy or not. But the only thing that I can say is that there is no simple conflict, but there are complex conflicts, and there are much more complicated crises. So Syria and Iraq happen to be among the most super complicated, complex conflicts in the region. And if it was easy to solve them, we would not have been witnessing the 7th year today, with more and more people dying on a daily basis. So the political masters are ongoing with their peace talks. They are not necessarily succeeding much, apparently. But our job requires us to give them with the most accurate humanitarian data happening on the ground, telling them that we cannot ignore what is happening. The human dignity is being attacked on a daily basis. So this is the part that I can respond to, that we commit to that. We will continue committing doing that, whether in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq, or in any situation where we are accountable for what we do. But in terms of political discussions and peace process, it's not for us to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We have last question from Antonita Fonari.
Yes, thanks. My name is Antonina. I'm from Chisinau. Of course, big gratitude for you and for people who organized this. You're the best. And thanks in advance for you, because my working language is Romanian and Russian, so you need to be tolerant. It's your profession. I think I want to hear more here and in our panels about how we can do to stand up and be tolerant, but to be winners. And this very big work, when we have most powerful opponents who have most power and sword, and they have money, because our issues, conflicts, it's work of politicians, and all politicians and all people and all industries who want a lot of money and power, they will be explore conflicts, they will be do conflicts, they will be sell armaments to have conflicts, because this give power and money. So I'm very curious to hear this, hear what we can do, and to hear about ethological approach, scientific approach, about psychological approach, about education approach, about advocacy, and about public, social, and education policies. what we can do to stop this, but to do this very strategical, not only to work like firemen who come and here it's problem and here we need to stop. I hope we'll be speak more about how to prevent. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I see this as an opening question for other panels and other workshops, but if any of the speakers would like to react just shortly, you can, but I think it's a huge question.
I just
Okay,
can read one small quote that reflects precisely on what you have just said. It's a quote from Stefan O'Brien, who is the Under-Secretary General and Emergency Relief Coordinator for the UN agency now. He says, the pace of change is accelerating. What used to take a generation now happens in 5 years. Humanitarian organizations need to be in constant state of review, adapting and reinventing ourselves if we are to remain relevant and do the best to deliver quickly and effectively to people in need. Thank you.
There cannot be better closing of this session. Sajeda, thank you very much. Thank you very much for listening and for being part of this panel. I would like to very much thank you, Mr. Dzhemilev. I would like to thank you, Sajeda Shawa. I would like to thank you, Julia Roig, for joining us and for being with us for this day, and some of you also for tomorrow. Please use the possibility, informally talk to them. And now we will have a coffee break, and we will continue at 12 here. And two very strong stories you will hear in the next session. So please be back on time. Thank you very much.